Okay, so you've sent over some articles about this Imam Mohammad Ali Elahi. Um, he's a cleric, right, based in Michigan. And he's been in the news lately, seems like, because of his ties to some pretty high-profile U.S. politicians.
Yeah, he's definitely been on the radar, especially because of those connections to, well, Kamala Harris in particular. It's a complicated story, though. You start digging into it and you find all these threads leading back to Iran, questions about influence, that kind of thing.
So let's start with the basics. Who is this guy? The articles mention he's the head honcho over at the Islamic House of Wisdom in Dearborn, Michigan. That's going to make him a pretty big deal in that community.
Oh, absolutely. He's a prominent figure there, no doubt. But his influence, it goes way beyond Michigan. One of the things that really jumps out about him is his background. Back in the 80s, when things were super tense between the U.S. and Iran, he was actually the head of the Iranian Navy's political ideological office.
Whoa, okay, that's not something you see every day. How does someone go from that to leading a religious center in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's definitely an unusual career path, to say the least. It speaks to the complexities of his story, his deep connections to Iran. He's known to be tight with former Iranian presidents even, like Hashemi Rafsanjani, that name ring a bell?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Well, Rafsanjani was a major player in Iranian politics, a real heavyweight. The fact that Elahi is connected at that level, it tells you something about his influence, his reach.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm guessing those connections have raised some eyebrows, especially given some of Elahi's past statements. I mean, his comments about Hezbollah, the Israel-Palestine conflict, those haven't exactly flown under the radar.
Oh, yeah, those comments have definitely caused a stir. His support for Hezbollah, which the U.S. considers a terrorist group, that's going to turn heads no matter what. And then there was that statement about giving his blood to liberate Lebanon. It's like, whoa, okay, this guy's serious.
Yeah, intense is one word for it. I mean, obviously, freedom of speech is huge, right? But when someone's beliefs align with groups that are, well, considered hostile to the U.S., it's bound to raise concerns, don't you think?
Totally. It's this tricky balance between, like, respecting someone's right to their views and wondering if those views might be, influenced by a foreign power, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Right, it's a minefield.
Oh.
And speaking of tricky situations, we have to talk about his connection to Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that whole thing caused quite a stir, didn't it?
Well, they were at a vaccination event together back in 2021, right, in Detroit.
Right, but it wasn't just that they were at the same event. They were actually supposed to visit Elahi's Islamic House of Wisdom together.
Really? I didn't realize it went that far.
Yeah, the visit got canceled last minute because of a flood, but the fact that it was even on the table, it suggests that they were aiming for more than just a handshake and a photo op.
And then there's that photo of them together, all smiles. That takes on a whole new meaning when you know the backstory.
Exactly. It's not just a politician shaking hands with a constituent anymore. It's like, what's the deeper story here? Are we looking at a potential strategy being played out, maybe even something connected to Iranian influence operations in the U.S.?
Hold on, Iranian influence operations. Okay, we need to unpack that. What does that even mean? Like, are we talking spies and secret agents?
Well, not necessarily like James Bond or anything. It's usually a lot more subtle than that.
So how does it work?
Think of it like a network, people and organizations, some of them aware of what they're doing, some of them maybe not, all working to push a certain narrative, a certain agenda that just happens to benefit Iran.
So more like shaping public opinion, influencing decision makers behind the scenes, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's a long game, right?
Yeah.
And it's often more effective to plant seeds of doubt, to amplify existing divisions within society than it is to try to force some big dramatic change.
And some people are saying that Elahi might be a part of these operations. That seems like a pretty serious accusation to just throw around.
Oh, it is. And a lot of it comes back to his ties with this group called the Alavi Foundation. They're based in Manhattan. This is where the story gets really interesting.
Okay, you've got my attention. Who are the Alavi Foundation and what's their connection to all of this?
Well, here's the thing. Federal prosecutors, they've accused the Alavi Foundation of being a front for the Iranian government, funneling money to different groups in the U.S., and guess what? Elahi's Islamic House of Wisdom, they're on the receiving end of some of that cash. We're talking close to $500,000 since 2000.
Whoa, okay, hold up. So we're talking about potential financial links between Elahi's group and an organization that's accused of being directly connected to the Iranian government. This is starting to sound like a spy movie.
Right. It makes you wonder where exactly all that money is going and what it's being used for. But get this, it doesn't stop there. The Alavi Foundation, they've also given millions of dollars to American universities, like big-name institutions. Columbia University is one that comes to mind.
Wait, they're funding American universities? What's the thinking there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some researchers, they're worried that this funding could be a way for Iran to, exert some influence on American campuses, maybe try to shape how people talk about the Middle East, about U.S. foreign policy, things like that.
So instead of going after politicians directly, they're going after the next generation of leaders, the thinkers, the influencers.
Exactly. And that raises a whole bunch of concerns about academic freedom. Like, is this money being used to silence dissenting voices? To promote a certain agenda? It's a slippery slope.
Okay, so let me get this straight. We've got a prominent religious leader with ties to both the U.S. and Iran. We've got potential funding from a group that may or may not be a front for the Iranian government. And now we've got connections to American universities. This is like trying to untangle a giant knot.
That's a great way to put it. And to really understand what's going on, we need to dig a little deeper into these Iranian influence operations. How do they actually work? What are they trying to achieve? And how does Elahi's case fit into all of this?
Well, it's not always card chases and secret agents. It's usually a lot more nuanced.
Okay, so less James Bond, more like what?
Think about it like a chess game, right? Every move is planned out, strategic, aimed at a bigger goal.
Okay, so what's the goal here? What are they playing for?
Well, in this case, a lot of it comes down to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
That makes sense. It's a sensitive topic, to say the least.
It's a tinderbox, really. And public opinion, it carries a lot of weight. So if a country like Iran wants to influence what happens, it makes sense for them to try and sway public opinion in their favor.
And how does Imam Elahi fit into this?
Well, you've got his stance on the conflict, right? His support for Hezbollah, his criticism of Israel, calling for Netanyahu's imprisonment. All of that plays into a narrative that, well, that aligns pretty closely with Iran's interests. So the question is he just exercising his right to free speech? Or is there something more going on here? Could he be, I don't know, a pawn in this larger game?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's not an easy one to answer. It's rarely black and white. You have to consider everything. For example, the Director of National Intelligence, they've actually confirmed that Iran actively supports protests here in the U.S. related to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Really? So there's actual evidence that they're trying to influence things on the ground here?
Oh, yeah. And that adds another layer to the whole Elahi situation, doesn't it? I mean, knowing that Iran is actively engaged in these kinds of operations, it makes you look at his activism a little differently.
Right. Like, is it all coincidental? Or is there a chance, even if he's not aware of it, that he's being used to further their agenda?
Exactly. It's like that saying, if it walks like a duck,
and quacks like a duck,
it might be a duck. But here's the thing. Proving direct influence, that's tough. These operations, they're designed to be subtle, to stay under the radar.
So how do we even begin to make sense of it all? As, regular people, not spies or intelligence analysts, how do we tell the difference between what's real and what's, manufactured?
It all starts with awareness, right? Just knowing that these operations exist, that's the first step. And then it's about being a critical consumer of information, especially when it comes to something as emotionally charged as the Israel-Palestine conflict.
That's easier said than done these days. I mean, we're drowning in information, especially online.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why it's more important than ever to have, good media literacy skills. You gotta question everything. Look for independent verification. Don't just rely on sources that tell you what you want to hear.
So a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing.
Especially when it comes to information that's designed to make you feel something, Anger, fear, outrage. Those are powerful motivators, and they can be easily manipulated.
It's like you have to take a step back and look at things objectively. Try not to let your emotions get in the way.
Exactly. And remember, critical thinking doesn't mean dismissing everything outright. It's about looking at things from different angles, Considering multiple perspectives before you form an opinion.
Okay, so we've talked about Elahi's background, his connection to the Alavi Foundation, this whole idea of Iranian influence operations. How does it all fit together? What's the takeaway here?
It's about understanding that what seems like an isolated event, like a meeting between a cleric and a politician, it can actually be a small piece of a much larger puzzle.
It's like you got to follow the money, right?
Yeah.
Look beyond the surface to see who benefits, even if it's not obvious at first.
You got it. And that leads to some really important questions about transparency, about accountability. If foreign governments are actively trying to influence our political system, even in subtle ways, what does that mean for our democracy?
It's a little unsettling, to be honest. Makes you wonder if our elected officials are really representing us, or if they're being influenced by, well, outside forces.
It's a valid concern, and it's something we need to be talking about more. We can't fix a problem if we don't acknowledge it exists, right?
So where do we go from here? What can we do as citizens to make sure our voices are heard, that our interests are being represented in this, increasingly complicated world?
Well, it's about being proactive, staying informed, educating yourself. Don't just take things at face value.
So, like, do your own research.
Exactly. Read beyond the headlines, check multiple sources, and think critically about what you're reading, especially when it comes to anything online.
Okay, but it's not just about us as individuals, right? I mean, there's got to be a role for, like, government institutions to play in all of this, too.
Oh, for sure. We need more transparency from our elected officials. Where's the money coming from? Who are they meeting with? What are their stances on these really crucial issues?
It's like, shine a light on it all right. Sunlight's the best disinfectant and all that.
Exactly. And we need to be having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable, because if we don't talk about it, if we just brush it under the rug, nothing's going to change.
Right, like silence is basically compliance at that point.
And it's not just about the government either. Education is huge, right? We need to be teaching media literacy in schools, helping young people develop those critical thinking skills early on.
Yeah, give them the tools to navigate this crazy information landscape we live in.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power. The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to spot these tactics, to resist manipulation, to make sure our voices are heard.
I like that. Knowledge is power. It's a good note to end on.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive has been eye-opening, to say the least. It's a lot to process, but definitely gives you something to think about.
It's a complicated world out there, that's for sure. But hey, at least we're talking about it.
That's a good start. Well, on that note, we'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.